This guy is the president and COO of Coldwell Banker Commercial, and if anybody knows about Coldwell Banker Commercial, they're massive. Like, it's a global company, 20 countries, 200 plus offices, 3,000 commercial professionals. They are the real deal. And he's been with the organization since 2003. For, I think, probably the last 8 of those years, he's been as the COO. So he really has been the key driver in the growth of that brand and that franchise. Today, I believe, is the first speaking gig, if you will, since he retired 6 days ago. Right? So hopefully he'll share a little bit about what the next part of his world is. But again, as I asked before, there's the hashtag for those of you that didn't get it. Social media. Give Elizabeth some love on social media, and please welcome the man, the myth, the legend, on Fred Schmidt. Oh my gosh.
Grab the, thank you. Thank you very much, Todd. And let's give a round of applause to the CB and CBC team, and also everybody who's put this thing together. Your growth, what I've seen in your office just from when I was here 2 years ago, is emblematic of what's going on in this marketplace. And you guys embody the 4 things I've always lived by: entrepreneurial, masterful, principled, driven. So congratulations to you guys and your team. So anyway, the good news for most of you is a good chunk of my speech has already been covered by Elizabeth. So that's the good news. But I will be talking about demographics, and I think it's important to footnote that. You'll see demographics in both our slides. That's not coincidental, because there's waves of change happening in the United States and in our society in general. Not demographics, technology, and a whole bunch of other things that are happening all at once. So it's a confluence of things coming together, and so we'll spend some time on that. I'm going to take you across the general economic conditions, the tax law changes, demographics, then the commercial real estate, and particularly how this all impacts what's going on in the commercial real estate of the business. That's what I know and love, and so I'll try to tie those elements together in terms of what are the demand side of the equation. Then we'll get into the supply a little, and trends and all that good stuff. So with that being said, let's take, I always have a theme. 2 years ago, it was a recovery from the recovery, all these different things. 2 years ago, it was right after the election, and I'll read this to you, and it literally comes out of Bridge from Dummies. I had one of my secretaries say, give me something, I don't want to be political, but let's just take a look at something that ties in with Trump, right? Because it was, and so it says, in Bridge, you have a wild card called Trump cards. The Trump cards are really wild because they change from hand to hand depending on the bidding, and I think that's apropos. The theme for this year is reverting to the mean to mean. And what I mean by that is we're finally getting back to an environment where interest rates are, we're getting back to a normal cycle, but if you have lower interest rates that everybody's had for the last 10 or 11 years versus right now, that's a big adjustment. What are 30-year fixed mortgages? We're 3.25, 3.5 a year ago, right? They're about 4.2 now. That's a big bump. So reverting to the mean, meaning the mean median mode, is very interesting. That's the theme there, okay? So we're going from a handoff from monetary to fiscal policy. That is the Fed unwinding their balance sheet. So we're going back to normal ways of funding things. Interest rates going up again. That's a normal cycle. It seems abnormal, but this is the way it's been for the last 50, 60 years. Reduced regulatory environment, that's a huge, huge thing in terms of what's happening right now. I don't think enough credit is given with regard to that. And no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, just taking the shackles off, the demilitancy against business has had a huge impact in terms of increasing business. And then, of course, the tax overhaul. I'm going to talk about the impact it has on commercial real estate in the next 2 or 3 slides. Trust me, you don't want me giving you accounting advice, but I will give you some of the discussion points that I think will help accelerate commercial real estate. I can tell you this, the tax law changes were and are very good to commercial real estate in general. Infrastructure investment, we'll see. Business consumer sentiment very high, and then the positive employment. We had 223,000 jobs last month. We're averaging 2.5 million a year. It's the key driver. Today's Wall Street Journal, that's why I didn't come up to read the paper while I was talking to you all, but the front U.S. has more jobs than jobless, okay? It's the first time since the 60s. 6.7 million jobs out there and 6.3 million people unemployed right now, okay? So everything Elizabeth was saying about the drivers for employment gains and those elements are manifesting themselves throughout the United States. And in my 38 years in this business, the mantra has always been location, 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 right? Anybody in the real, you've all heard that and everything else. I submit to you the next 30 years, it's employment, employment, employment. You look at technology, you look at the way people can conduct their business, work from anywhere, where employment is, and that ties into quality of life, which a lot of you have here in Grand Junction. It ties into available housing, a whole bunch of, a myriad of things. So it's just not where the jobs are, it's where people could migrate to and have a good quality of life. So going forward, yeah, location is important, but I think employment, employment, employment is going to be the key driver for corporations in this country and where they're going to locate and operate their people. And then, of course, we have GDP. We're averaging 2.75 to 3.0. I just heard this morning that they thought second quarter was going to be about 3.5 to 4%, I think. We always start off the year with a lower GDP, so it starts to average out over the course of the year. So the bottom line is we're not in bad shape. And by the way, for those of you who don't want to listen to me for the rest of this presentation, the economy is doing very well. Commercial real estate, supply is gradually decreasing, demand's gradually increasing, and we're doing well overall. So that's my presentation in a nutshell, okay? With that being said, what are some of the headwinds that we're seeing? We are seeing, with the increased pressure of interest rates and the phenomenal sales that we've experienced in commercial real estate over the last few years, what I call pricing discovery, okay? Buyer and seller are kind of feeling each other out, particularly buyers with regard to what are my returns, is there upward pressure on those returns, what's going to be happening. So we're going through, I don't want to say a lull, but we're definitely going through a recalibration. That is certainly going on in the major markets in the country: San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, Los Angeles. The big institutional properties, they've had a 25 to 30% decrease in their volumes. On the secondary, tertiary markets like this, the returns are still high, it's still relatively stable, so we're in pretty good shape there. But in terms of the big markets, there's certainly pricing discovery going on. That's actually going on, by the way, in the urban markets, also in the high-end housing. There's also that pricing discovery happening. Increased deficits, $1 trillion a year. I don't know, you heard a lot about the deficit. I'm not here to get into the whole deficit discussion, but I do know this much. At some point, you have to pay for that. And if interest rates are going up, the cost of paying for that goes up, and that sucks capital out of the private sector. Okay, so sooner or later, there's going to be a price to be paid for this. It doesn't, either that or you devalue the dollar and a whole bunch of other things. So there is a threat looming there. I'm not sure how bad it is, but it's something that to be aware of. Trade wars can offset all the benefits of the economic, all the big incentives we just had, the tax changes and everything else. So we need to be careful. I'll submit to you, it's a quote I've heard many years ago, and I think it's apropos. It's better to have goods going across borders than soldiers, okay, at the end of the day. Event risk, my goodness, you can go every 90 days. Venezuela, North Korea, Turkey, Italy on the sovereign debt side. I mean, that's just in the last 60 to 90 days. If I went to a year ago, it'd be a whole bunch of different things. Those are all looming on the horizon. Some of this upward pressure on oil prices besides supply and demand is actually concern about the political stability in the Middle East. If they bomb the Straits of Hormuz and things of that nature, what would happen to oil overall? Now, the good news, and particularly in this area, is we are finally self-sufficient, or not relatively self-sufficient as in terms of producing oil, and we can gear up very quickly, and I think that bodes very well. That says, by the way, having stable, low-priced oil is just as important to the overall economy, disposable income of consumers and everything, as is interest rates. It's that important. It literally flows through everything in our society. So if oil hits that 100, the conventional wisdom is if you get up to $100, $125 a barrel, that's when disposable income for consumers starts to decrease or evaporate. And that's when you have some real trouble. Interest rates rising. I've been predicting an increase in cap rates. I'll talk about this in the 10-year T-bill for the last 5 years. I'm finally right, okay? But we're at that 3%, 2.9% on a 10-year T-bill, which is the key measurement for commercial real estate and residential real estate overall. And then changing environment for our customers. This is my words, the Uberification of everything, okay? My wife ordered Chinese food 2 nights ago, and they had it delivered, and it was an Uber that delivered it to my house. And I was sitting there, you know, being a junkie for all this stuff, and I'm looking at that and thinking, you know, what's to stop them from delivering a pair of slacks from, you know, Saks Fifth Avenue or whatever the store is? I mean, you just think about it, all of a sudden, there you go. You know, you have getting deliveries of everything through e-commerce and all that. So it has an impact in a lot of different areas. So it's my word, Uberification. We'll talk a little bit about that later. And then FASB, ISB, Federal Accounting Standards Board. Not to get too wonky on you here, but that is moving leases have to be there onto the balance sheets. That's the end of this year going into next year. Most companies already do that, except retailing is where it's going to be impacted the most. So what does that mean in terms of commercial real estate? That means you could have retailers or clients that are looking at a shorter lease term and a more flexible lease term because they don't want to show that debt on their balance sheets. It's the equivalent of that. So it could have an impact in terms of investments in commercial real estate overall. So the tax bill, I'm not, you know, you had the tax rate reductions, mortgage interest deduction, those elements, but I'll talk a little bit about capital gains, carried interest, like-kind exchanges, those areas, and the impact more on the commercial real estate sector overall. And again, like I said, the tax law changes are very, very good for our industry and for the business overall. So the first one is the pass-through income, and again, I am not a CPA, you don't want me giving you accounting advice, but that 20% pass-through if you're a subchapter S corporation or a LLC or whatever configuration you're in, now is the time to start to look at how your income is coming in, because there's that 20% rule, there's a whole bunch of things there, but the bottom line is how you're set up as a private entity or as an entity is going to have a big impact, and you can get some pretty darn good tax gains overall with regard to that. And that has an impact on our business also. And certainly for passive income with regard to REITs and investments. 1031 exchanges, the tax deferred, this was on the docket, by the way, they were going to take this off. This was on the chopping block. They kept it in, and I'm glad they did overall. Again, it's just for real estate now. They have taken out improvements like furniture, fixtures, and equipment, so that can't be part of the gain overall. And that does have an impact, particularly if you're selling a restaurant. If you have furnitures and fixtures in a restaurant, I'm not sure how they're going to treat the depreciation on that side of the equation, but it's something that needs to be looked at, the overall improvements on a property, but it's for real property only. And then one of the biggest ones, which I don't think has had a lot of publicity overall, is the change in depreciation schedules from 27.5 years to 25 years for residential and 39 to 25 for commercial, and then 100% write-offs for assets that you buy in that year. So again, that's really going to, if you're in a business and you buy an asset, you don't have to depreciate that over a 5-year hold, or it is in this year or next year overall. Now, one of the things that I don't want to get, again, too deep on this, these are temporary, meaning I think it's 2025. So this could go away at some point in time. And then also carried interest, which is the provision that's really towards the hedge funds, but I would say to you that the carried interest deduction for people that fix and flippers, right? You see the flippers on TV, there's flippers in the room here and everything else. Well, this law, I think it's inadvertent, for real estate, is a 3-year hold. But if you're a flipper, say you do it in your first year, you fix the house, you fix it up, and you sell it in the first year, you could be impacted by this. I think they're going to come out with the IRS is probably going to have a change or a modification on this overall. So those are the tax law changes. Very, very good for our industry, as I said before. By the way, these slides are available. You don't have to take pictures. I think they're available to all of you if you post them or whatever. I'll be glad to. I'm flattered you're taking a picture of it. That's good. So, okay, so Elizabeth covered a good chunk of this already, so I will not go too deep on the demographics other than to say us baby boomers, my generation, and by the way, this is the national number. That is a death curve, okay? So okay, I can't say it's Colorado and there's people. She nicely said this. I said, that's depressing. You look at it, here we go. However, to your point, and I think it's a huge one, the greatest concentration of wealth in the history of mankind exists with the baby boomers. Okay? What we've inherited, what we have. So now our kids want a big chunk of that going forward. I know that's going to be the case. But you need to understand, to the point that was made earlier, there's a lot of money sitting there, a ton of it. And how are you going to access that, service that, and everything is extremely important. Okay? What behind it, where the growth is what Generation X is that's the lost generation, the one in between. No disrespect to you guys, but you're kind of in between the two biggies there. You probably stand the most to gain in terms of the job situation, because there's just not enough of you to fill those positions that are out there. So if you're a Gen Xer, you're not in bad shape in terms of employment. You also suffered the most, though, from the downturn in the economy, because that was right in the middle of your most productive and formative years. So that group really took the biggest hit when the downturn occurred. And then, of course, the millennials. I'm a father of a 22-year-old and 29-year-old, so I have a couple of them. That dark line there, that 26-year-old, that's actually this is from the Urban Land Institute, by the way. That's about a year or two old now. So those 26-year-olds or 27, 28-year-olds, that's the high water mark for the millennials, okay? And so they are very delayed in terms of formation of households, getting married, all those different things. They're the latest group in this country overall. But that high water mark, that's the group that's coming right through overall. And that group is going to dictate where, and if you heard me say this, I said this 3 years ago, I'll say it now, I said it every one of these, where you live, work, play, they're going to dictate the configuration and demand for commercial and residential real estate for the next 20 to 25 years, okay? So that's why the time we're spending on demographics, and it's apropos that you are, is in terms of, okay, what does this mean to me? I'm in business, I've got, well, you need to pay attention to this group because you're servicing different communities and different ways of doing that. So here's the millennials, and by the way, these numbers are somewhat arbitrary. As you well know, there's a border between where a lot of discussion about the generations. So I took these from the ULI, but if you wanted to debate it, I would not argue with you. 76 million strong. Right behind them, okay, is Generation Z, okay? That's our children and grandchildren. That's that 0 to 18 to 19-year-old group right now by this definition. That first cadre of kids are freshmen in college right now, okay? So this is not some way off thing. You see these young kids, this group is already hitting. So those two generations are very large. And if you think the millennials were wired and had all the different changes that are going, we ain't seen nothing yet, okay? Look at for those of you who have children and grandchildren in that age group, they literally pick up those devices before they even know how to speak and talk, and they can push the buttons and move things around. Well, think about that in terms of how you're going to cater to them in terms of business, the workplace environment that you're going to have for them. Everything they do is expected to be technological, because that's all they know. So again, we're spending time on this because we see the wave of change coming, and it's going to be big, all right? All this more or less says, and I apologize for the wordiness, is the conventional wisdom of boomers that we're all going to retire, go to Florida, or for you guys going to Scottsdale, or wherever it is that you all go to. No, we're probably be like me. I just retired, Friday, and here I am on the road. I'm going to continue working, but I'm not going to do it at the pace that I've done over the last few years. But I want to continue to working. I'm probably going to live near where my kids are also, typically for the boomers. So we're all not going to go in the sunset and retire off. Generation Z, as I said before, is the group that was the most challenged in terms of the economy. And then the millennials, the conventional wisdom also is they were all going to go to they have been migrating to these urban clusters, going to the cities, leaving the all that good stuff, and staying there. Well, the fact of the matter is they're just like the rest of us. You get married, you have kids, you're forming households. They're a little older in doing this, and you're going to go out to the burbs, get along, do all the things that all of us have done, over our career. I live in the New York area, so you move in New York City, then you have kids, and you want to move out in same kind of migration and thing. So they're no different. They're just a little late in that process overall. This is the discussion about the workforce participation rate. This is again from the ULI. The fascinating part of this slide, because we hear a lot about workforce participation. If you look at that long-term trend slide, it's been going down since the 1950s. So it's not something it's not a new phenomena overall. There's a lot of discussion in terms of how, who, and all that good stuff. My point is it important? Yes. Is it that important? I don't know. I don't think so, okay? You got to see how, you got to break it down by the demographics and things, as Elizabeth was saying earlier. Okay? And then this is by cohorts in terms of the different age groups. So the primary employers in the United States, you have in the urban cities, TAMI, technology, advertising, media, information. Okay, you have the fire sector, which is the traditional one, finance, insurance, real estate. I used to have, and I'm not counting the manufacturing sector in this, I'm looking at this more in office and retail and urban, suburban clusters, if you will, overall. I used to have energy up there. Now, as you well know, in this area, the energy sector has taken a dive for a while. I'll probably put energy back up there next year. So the energy sector is still having a big impact. And now, those are, eds, meds, and tech, okay? Those are all, chances are pretty good if you're any city in the United States, the primary employment drivers are one of those elements up there, or a combination of all three. So what are the emerging trends? Well, by the way, that's 2018. It's rare that you see everything buy, hold, and sell at the same time in the green area, so it's actually, again, pretty good environment for commercial real estate with regard to those, the investment climate. This chart is a survey of all the developers and owners, again, from the urban ULI, Urban Lands. I encourage a lot of you, by the way, it's a great resource, very objective, and they do a good job. And I've been an active member of them for many, many years. Their survey in terms of economic and financial issues, you see most of the things, it's kind of discolored there, but the top three on each area are in the green, the rest are in that light green to yellow. Jobs and income growth are number one, interest rates and cost, and then macroeconomic issues. Those are the top three. Social, political, terrorism, war and epidemics, and then social inequality. I'm pointing that out because that's the first time I've seen that bump up there in my 15 or 25 years in the ULI. So there's a big awareness, not just in other circles, but in circles, developers, owners, about social inequality, affordable housing that may manifest itself. And what does that mean? How do we serve people at all different levels? And that's good, by the way, that it's aware, that it's up there as an issue, as a thing that we, that part of this part of our industry is paying attention to that. And it hadn't in the past as much as it should, okay? And then real estate development, land and construction costs, capital availability. I will also say the availability of labor and in terms of qualified labor in the construction business is very, very dear, and I think we'll see increased prices as a result of that overall. And then this chart, you were talking about migration. It's interesting about migration. This chart is for migration to from cities to interior locations. So you'll see the Inland Empire in California. Well, the Inland Empire, if you know where that is one of the largest industrial bases in the country for warehousing and distribution, but also migration of population. They're moving from LA and the coastal area out west, or east, if you will, because there's more affordable housing. Philadelphia. Now, I live in the New York metro area, about an hour and a half to 2 hour ride from Philadelphia, and I'd never expected Philadelphia to be number 2 up there overall, but that's a big migration of a lot of people coming from the New York area for affordable housing, quality of life, and those issues. Denver's up there on that list. Okay, so you have, these are not the major cities. This is not San Francisco, New York, Chicago, LA, all the usual suspects. These are areas that are seeing migration, and that bodes well for what I'll call a lot of the secondary and tertiary markets. And you guys fit that bill overall. People, I think there's one of the trends is people are looking at quality of life and availability of affordable housing, a whole myriad of things. But I think that's part of the change that's happening. So now we'll get into the real estate side. This slide I showed to you 3 years ago, but it's still apropos. In fact, if anything, those changes are manifesting themselves to a much greater extent, and I'll go a little deeper on each one of them. Office space, work from anywhere, omni-channel approach on retailing, okay? The retailing, the industrial influence of distribution hubs on the industrial side, and then, of course, the tremendous growth in multifamily. And again, I'll do a deep dive on each one of these. Each one of the specialties are going through the huge systemic shifts. I would submit to you that office and retail are probably going through the most challenging shifts. Industrial and apartment are doing very well. Industrial has supplanted apartments as the #1 investment in the United States, although apartments are up there right now. So, the shared economy, live, work, play. You have office space, you have WeWork, which I don't know if you guys have a WeWork, you probably don't have one here, but Regis and shared office concepts that's going on, proliferating all over the United States. I've been in this business long enough, Regis is up there, that I'll be curious to see. I'm not being skeptical of the WeWork concept. I think it's here to stay, but I've been in the business long enough where if you look at the fixed costs of WeWork, they're paying those rents and renting out those units on short-term leases, if you will, to startups and companies. When a downturn occurs, I've seen that model crash 2 or 3 times in this business. So it's when the downturn occurs, we'll see what happens with that overall. But the shared economy, living at a place and working at a place, WeWork is actually looking at apartments and Airbnb, all these different things blending together is happening. So there is something going on the real estate side of the equation where I could live in an apartment upstairs and then go down to my office and then go back up and do those. So a lot of different things happening overall. So laboratories, I want to set up a lab and I would need to do research and development. It would cost a fortune to set up a lab. I can go WeWork to a laboratory and set up a lab, pay for it for a month or 2, whatever the research I need to do, and then I'm out of there. Okay? So the shared economy is manifesting itself. Again, I'm looking at it as a real estate practitioner saying, what is the use, what are these uses, what are the trends, and how is that going to impact real estate overall? These are the trends in the 4 specialties. Bottom line is office and retail have remained relatively static on their vacancies. Industrials had the biggest decrease, and apartments or vacancies are gradually increasing. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. But overall, office and retail have been, holding their own. They're kind of running in place, if you will. Industrial is on fire, and then apartments are starting to see a gradual growth. Okay. So let's talk about apartments. This is the United States. When you're under 4.5% vacancy, conventional wisdom is anything under 5% vacancy or lower connotates new construction and new development. So we're starting to see what's happening is new development is coming online, particularly in the Class A market, to address demand. Those demographics we were talking about earlier, okay? Us boomers, by the way. You're also going to have boomers getting out of their houses, getting to a smaller house, changing, simplifying themselves, all the things that goes on, moving into urban clusters, walkability. And so you may have a transition here between millennials and boomers actually going from different uses of properties. The West, where you guys are, 3.9%, 4.3%. I can tell you, I know in LA, our offices in LA and Orange County, they're at 2.3%, 2.2% vacancy on apartments. So it's just been amazing. Rents have increased overall. The rate of the increase has decreased. So the rents have been going up. There's 5.7% 2 or 3 years ago. Now it's 3 to 4% increases in rents around the United States. But the rate of it's decreasing because supply is coming online to meet demand overall. So I think we're finally seeing with apartments start of a little bit of stabilization, but it's still been shooting through the ceiling. The issue in apartments is the B and C areas, those apartments. That's where the affordable units is the hard part of the equation here, and addressing that issue going forward is going to be probably one of the biggest. That gets back to that social equality thing we're talking about and how to address affordable housing, but coming up with B and C properties. Office space, 16.4, it's held level. Some upward increase in rents overall. Office is, again, I've said this before, the average square foot per employee is about 150 square feet per employee. That's down from 250 to 300 square feet per employee 10 years ago. Realogy's corporate headquarters, the company I retired from. It's interesting, I almost said my company, right? I caught myself 4 days ago. My team did the deal. We moved out of a building that was 390,000 square feet into a 290,000 square foot building. Beautiful building, new building, exact same head count, okay? So think about that. We reduced our square footage by almost 25 to 30%, kept the head count the same, open floor plan, floor to window ceilings, not a lot of private offices, shared, virtual officing, all the different techniques that you have. So the average square foot, the envelope of an employee, per employee is shrinking. Now, having said that, office is the most impacted by positive employment. So the office market is growing, but it's not growing at the rate that it needs to because of the efficiencies. And companies are looking at profitability and productivity per employee. Okay, I look at how much time I spend at my desk. My job I retired from, I was on the road 40% of the year. I didn't need this huge office. I mean, they gave me a beautiful office. I'm not complaining, but I was never in it, you know. And so just think about the utilization. So that's why that WeWork and everything ties together overall. Technology, work from anywhere, freelance, contract work. Again, you look at the work environment, the employees that are out there, a lot of independent contractors and all the different things that go with that manifests itself in terms of demand and how office space is configured. And that change is happening as we speak. And that has an impact in terms of how you would finance your buildings, who your tenants are, all those, it has a ripple effect overall. And, you know, I don't think the marketplace is changing to that yet, but it's coming. Also, I would, not to go too deep, again, go too deep, but if you're wiring a building, literally wiring a building for Wi-Fi, electrical and everything, you need to really think about this because you have to have all that infrastructure in place. Probably more than the configuration of the space. Somebody coming in for a tech group or a bunch of startups or whatever, they're going to be looking at the infrastructure of your electrical and technical sophistication in terms of the facility overall. Retail, this is the one, right? The one that's going through the most. 10.1%, it's about the same as it was year over year. The most challenged out of the four categories going through the biggest change, but I'll debunk some of the fiction that we're seeing overall on this, okay? Number one, you're hearing a lot about, we heard of Toys R Us closed, right? They're headquartered in New Jersey. Sears stores, all those different things. Well, at the same point, there was over 4,000 stores opened in the United States over 2017. And that's a little bit more, it's a little more than the closure of all the stores. Now, the difference is the average square footage per store, the type of store is changed dramatically. But overall, we're not too bad in the retail sector. I'll submit to you on a personal opinion that Sears, which was huge, I mean, it was the biggest, one of the biggest companies in this country, okay? They were to take e-commerce and all the other, the whole Amazon phenomenon out of the equation. I submit to you that Sears probably would have gone under anyway because of the way they merchandises and the way they treated their customers, right? Had nothing to do with e-commerce. That just accelerated the process. So it's those things that are important. Malls, the B and C malls, in fact, when I was here 3 years ago, I was talking about the mall, what's the mall, Todd? Yep, so, and I was saying, the B and C malls that have some degree of functional obsolescence, they have Sears, JCPenney, or whatever as anchors in those stores. They're going to take down those walls, they'll do adaptive reuse and everything. My understanding is that mall is going through some sort of transformation, and we're over-malled in this country. It's about 3.5 to 4 times the square footage per population base that we need, so those are going through change. But the top end's doing very well in terms of retailers, and the bottom end, the discounters, if you will. Okay? The middle is where you don't want to be in terms of retailing. And then the fast fashion, off-price and department stores, H&M, Zara, those, they call it fast fashion, where they used to have the cycles for designing dresses and clothes and everything else. Used to be a long 180-day, 1-year cycle. Now that's down to 30 to 60 days. Okay? So they design the fashion, they have it, and it is on the racks. Okay? It's there. So that's happening. And what they're doing is taking those specialty, the cosmetics, women's cosmetics, and by the way, this is all female related in terms of the demand for this space and how it's configured. And then cosmetics, beauty, the things that are like the subsections of the department stores, they're separating out into separate lines overall. And then the e-commerce, to a point, it's controlling that, but we're seeing it's the battle of the supply chains, okay? If you look at, I don't want to get too hard on Amazon. Amazon's brilliant. They have a brilliant business model. But if you look at Amazon over the last 10 or 15 years, on the retail side of their selling of their goods, now the cloud-based, they're making a lot of money. Retail, they just made a profit last year. It's the first time they made a profit on retail, okay? And you take that as compared to a Walmart, who's been very profitable. What they made in 1 quarter is more than what Amazon's made over the last 15 years on retail, okay? And I'm not dissing Amazon, but there is a point where you have to start to make money, okay? So, but it's the omni-channel approach to the consumer, to all of you, that's very important. You walk into a store, you want to buy a pair of slacks, they're not there, the store is going to say to you, okay, we'll have that to you within the next 24 hours, same-day delivery, and that correlates directly with the industrial sector I'm going to talk about next. So They do interrelate and talk. It's fascinating, by the way. They talk, they interrelate with each other. By the way, experiential and entertainment real estate in the retail sector is what we're all looking for. We're looking for experiences, not the shopping thing. You're going to go to the mall, you're going to go to the food court, meet with your friends, bring your kids there, and you're going to have an experience of some sort. So that's what's going to replace these large spaces, and that could be gyms, classes, healthcare, all those different uses going into these facilities overall. Industrial, 7.3% down to 6.8. The low single digits is the lowest I have seen in my career in the United States. This is the hottest market in the country, warehousing and distribution, battle of the supply chains. This all correlates directly with that omni-channel approach with retailers, and what they call this is the last mile, okay, which is getting to smaller square footage to get closer to the consumer, to get to you, to get that property, those goods in your hands within a day. And then you have the Uber and all that. You also will see, I think, they're talking about driverless cars, right? We've had a lot of discussion over the last few years of driverless cars, where I think the driver, excuse the pun, I don't mean it that way, the driver for driverless vehicles is going to come from this sector first. Okay, if you go to Long Beach, California, which is one of the largest ports in the United States, they have driverless trucks all over that port. If you ever go there, it's fascinating. You'll see the containers and everything, they're all driverless trucks. Not all, but a lot of them, okay? There's a dearth of truck drivers in the United States. There's 50 to 60,000 they need right now. And so I could see on Route 70 going from here to Salt Lake City to Denver, right? You put a train of trucks together at midnight, right? You send them to Salt Lake City, which is what, 4 or 5 hour ride from here, or you send them to Denver overnight. There's nobody on the highways. You reduce traffic deaths. So I think that's where you will see the driverless phenomenon take hold first. That's my opinion, by the way. I'm not an expert on this, but I think that's the opportunity that we'll see. The Panama Canal, particularly on the coast where I live, the widening of the bridges and the deepening the ports. So they're bringing the Panamax through the Panama Canal. So the East Coast cities, Gulf of Mexico, we're seeing a more increase of container traffic and distribution and everything. By the way, the Port of Long Beach, we have an office. We have 2 or 3 offices there, and they do very well. They went on strike. They couldn't have gone on strike at a worse time. Remember 2 or 3 years ago, the longshoremen went on strike. It's literally when the cities on the East Coast were starting to spend their money to gear up for the widening of the canal and their infrastructure. And what happened was all the suppliers said, you know, we need to have a fallback here. If they go on strike, that shuts our whole supply chain down. So they couldn't have done it at a worse time because everybody geared up right after that. Big picture, this is capital trends. The commercial prices, despite what I was talking about pricing discovery last year, you know, the buyers and sellers looking at this on the investment side of the equation, prices still went up 8.2% across the United States on commercial real estate properties last year. Industrial went up 11.1%. Multifamily, I couldn't find. I was trying to find. They didn't come out with the number yet. My understanding is about 8.8, 8.9% in terms of multifamily going up. And office, downtown office and retail were flat year over year. Suburban office has gone up slightly because there's a lot of adaptive reuse happening with that product line. So again, pricing on, if you own a REIT and you've got a pretty good return, even though REITs have taken a beating because of interest rates, it's still not a bad place to be when you look at those kinds of price increases. Cap rates, I'll talk about cap rates. I'll go to this one. Cap rates, most of you I'm assuming are familiar with cap rates. If you're not, it's a back of the envelope rate of return that we use. So if I want a 10% cap and I have a property that's generating, let's say, $10,000 of income, I divide that by 10%, and I get $1 million, you know, or $100,000. So you divide that. If you have a lower cap rate, it's a higher sale price. Higher cap rate, lower sale. So the correlation is just like a bond overall. So we are finally starting to see upward pressure on cap rates. Now, 10-year T-bill is the key. If you look at the bottom, the lower gray, it's creeping up to 3%. That is risk-free money, right? That's as risk-free as it gets. You're 3%, 2.9%. So the spread between that to a cap rate is called the risk premium. And that spread's been pretty low. So the risk premium, it's like 200 to 400 basis points, is gradually increasing, and therefore you would think that the returns are going to go up overall, although by virtue of the price gains that I just showed you on the last slide, it's not happening as much as we thought, okay? But that risk premium, that's risk-free money. Once you get it in that 3.25, 3.5%, which they think going into 2019 may occur, all of a sudden that becomes, you know, the T-bills and those rates become alternatives to the stock market, real estate markets, you know, all the other investment vehicles that are out there overall. So that's why we pay a lot of attention to this. And property prices I talked about. Commercial real estate, so I'm winding this down. I don't know how much time I have left. Am I doing okay? Okay. So more outlook, somewhat more defensive. Certainly warehousing and distribution is a very good sector to be in terms of investments. It may be a little overbought right now. Okay, I think too many buyers are out there going, it's become the stylish sector, so it, you know, depending on what you're looking at, but there's certainly an opportunity there. Apartments and then office depends on employment. Core is very pricey, but in the suburbs, if there's functionally and economically obsolete retail or suburban office space, it's actually not a bad place to do adaptive reuse. Medical facilities, restaurants, things like that, you can take it and play with that overall. And then retail grocery anchored, and then the high end or the low end, as I said before. Groceries, pad sites, those areas are doing very well in the United States. And continued low supply, income, less. The third bullet down there, the big difference I think going into this year is, again, we're getting back to the old way of doing business. The focus for years has been on appreciation of properties. Now I would submit to you, if I were advising you as a client, I would say now is the time, you know, get your, you know, let's keep our powder dry. Let's keep and focus on income on your properties, not appreciation. Income is the outcome now. And I think going forward, that's what we have to look at, the income on these properties. And that has an impact on pricing. So again, we're getting back to the fundamentals of doing this is nothing new if you've been in business a while. We're just getting back to the old way of doing this. The skyrocketing appreciation, I think, I'm not going to say it's over, but certainly going to be impacted. And adaptive reuse of property. Certainly this town, I was in downtown. I'm staying at the hotel right over here on Main Street. And, you know, walking through your town, you guys are a good example in your downtown. I mean, I saw in the last 2 or 3 years, adaptive reuse, existing retail storefronts. You still have a ways to go, but you know, you can see there's an energy. It's modernized. It's, you know, there's a lot of different types of property. You know, people there, people cluster there. Okay, you have an interesting set of statuary, I might add. Okay, investors follow jobs and people. Remember, I was going earlier. I was saying it's location, location, location. Now it's employment, employment, employment. And I would submit, as Elizabeth said, people. She was saying earlier, you were saying earlier about the boomers here in this area and their spending. So again, how do you cater to them? How do you configure space in terms of doing that? These are the different uses that we see: niche plays, medical office, senior housing, mixed-use lifestyle. Mixed-use lifestyle is, that's anywhere from retirement, gay and lesbian, ethnic, all those different groups, okay? So those are the lifestyle groups that you talk about, and they all are substantial demographics overall, and they should be paid attention to in terms of the real estate. Data centers and student housing. And make sure you have a trump card. I'll come back here as many times as you guys want me to. It's been an honor and pleasure to be with all of you, and thank you very much.